Welcome to Week 8 of the PEDSnet Centre Without Walls Data Analyst Training Curriculum. I'm Amy Goodwin Davies. I'm one of the data scientists with the PEDSnet group at CHOP. Our focus for this week is the PEDSnet study workflow. The intended learning points from this pre-recorded lecture, the readings, as well as the live session towards the end of the week are as follows. We'd like for trainees to come away with an understanding of why it's important to use study specification documents for PEDSnet studies. We'd also like for trainees to come away with an understanding of how they would contribute to the PEDSnet data analysis plan as part of the PEDSnet study workflow, as well as how they should use Atlassian tools, Jira, Confluence, and Bitbucket. Included in this week's reading is the Start RWE article on screen. Breaking down the title a bit, START stands for Structured Template for Planning and Reporting, and RWE here is real-world evidence, meaning evidence derived from data which comes from sources other than traditional clinical trials in the context of biomedical research. The article both introduces the specific template, but also discusses the rationale for specification documents more broadly. The broader context here is that there's a great deal of variability in real-world evidence study design and analysis. This is something that's been recognized by the broader research community, and checklists such as the STROBE checklist for observational research in epidemiology have been developed. However, these checklists are generally quite general and don't explicitly require all of the details that you would need to make a study fully reproducible. The goals for specification documents are to both convey the expectation for and facilitate transparent communication of methods. With a structured template, the impact of misinterpretation of prose, which lacks specificity, is vague or ambiguous, is reduced, and we're no longer requiring that the reader, reviewer, collaborator directly interpret analytic code to understand how a study was implemented. With a standardized format, if the reviewers or readers are familiar with that format, they're able to quickly orient and find key information for a study. In sum, this facilitates reproducibility, validity assessment, and evidence synthesis. At PEDSnet, we've developed the PEDSnet Data Analysis Plan. This is a Word document, the primary function for which is study specification. However, this document has secondary functions as a project management and study documentation tool. The investigator team, as well as the PEDSnet DCC, all contribute to completion of this document in an iterative fashion. Expanding on the project management goals for the PEDSnet DAP, this document should help the entire team navigate a study, for example, determining milestones for study completion. This document should also help manage expectations for different members of the study team, as well as make some of the data management and analytic work visible and transparent to the entire team. We note that the DAP will be refined. We're currently on version 2.1, but we'll make edits as we learn what works best across studies. We also note that the DAP workflow should be interpreted as a guideline rather than something really rigid. Moving on from why use study specification documents to how to complete the PEDSnet DAP as part of the PEDSnet study workflow. So just to reiterate, the PEDSnet DAP is a Word document for study specification that is collaboratively and iteratively completed by the study team. On screen is just a snapshot of the PEDSnet DAP, and you'll notice that there is helper text that's either in blue or in red. Generally speaking, sections with blue helper text should be completed by the investigators, whereas sections in red should be completed by the PEDSnet DCC or DSCC, and that's the data team or the project management team. When it comes to PEDSnet studies, which, as you know, involve the secondary use of EHR data, we've learned to expect the unexpected. It's not appropriate for us to fully specify a study before we begin interacting with the data and understand how relevant information for the study is represented. As such, we break down in the DAP into 3 phases. There's the study startup phase, which includes information that can be specified before the data work begins. And then there's phase 1, which involves defining the cohort, variables, study-specific data quality. Once that information is known, we move on to phase 2, which involves specifying and completing the analyses for the study. So the study startup phase involves specifying the rationale, the why of the study, the specific purpose and aims, as well as the query type or study design. Examples include development of a computational phenotype or identification of eligible patients to facilitate study recruitment. At this stage, we also ask that investigators specify the expected output that they're requiring from PEDSnet, and on the project management side, we detail personnel and responsibilities, as well as a timeline for phase 1. For phase 1, we specify the study sample and cohort definitions, as well as the use of the PEDSnet database, for example, the version and the dates included. At this point, we also define the study variables and complete any study-specific data quality analyses that are required for the study. Also at this point, from a project management perspective, we detail the timeline for the second phase, the analytic phase of the study. At phase 2, we describe the analyses and the output. Depending on the study, this will include descriptive analyses, statistical modeling, treatment of missing data, any sensitivity analyses, as well as the tables and figures that are to be output. On the next several slides, we're including some flow diagrams for how the PEDSnet DAP would be completed as part of the PEDSnet study workflow. So to orient you, in pink, that's material that should be led by the investigator. In light blue, that's material that should be led by the data team. Turquoise is the PMO, and yellow is where it's a combination of the investigator and the data team. So to walk through this a little bit, during the study startup phase, the investigator will complete the rationale, purpose and aims, study design, and expected output. Note that much of this information would be included in the initial project proposal before the study startup phase begins. The data team at this point would review and edit these sections. Also at this stage, the investigator and DCC will begin drafting the cohort definitions, use of the PEDSnet database, and together begin to draft the study variables and the study-specific data quality analyses section. At the same time, the project management team will be completing information about personnel and responsibilities, the overall timeline, and begin drafting the timeline for phase 1. The focus of phase 1 is study variable definition, cohort definition, use of the PEDSnet database, and study-specific data quality analyses. At this point in time, the PM would be focused on drafting the timeline for the second phase. For phase 2, which is focused on the study analyses, the investigator would take the lead on specifying the descriptive analyses, the statistical modeling, and the treatment of missing data, whereas the data team would be reviewing and editing this material. Together, the team would draft information about the sensitivity analyses, as well as the tables and the figures. It's expected that completion of these sections and the associated work would be iterative. and that the investigator would take the lead in reviewing work and providing feedback, and the data team takes the lead in actually executing the analyses and summarizing the findings. Once this material is complete, as well as the associated work, the study specification document should be finalized and the study is ready for study closeout. Before we move on from the DAP to the Atlassian tools, I will reiterate again that the workflow that we've described should be interpreted as a guide, and it's expected that there will be variation depending on personnel on a study team, as well as the goals and design of the study. Okay, moving on to how Atlassian tools should be used as part of the PEDSnet study workflow. These slides were adapted from slides developed by Kim Dickinson, one of the data scientists with the PEDSnet team at CHOP. Okay, so Atlassian tools. At PEDSnet, we use Jira, Bitbucket, and Confluence. Jira is project management software that we use for task assignment and tracking. Bitbucket is a Git-based code sharing and version control platform. And Confluence is a wiki that we use for knowledge sharing and meeting notes. And one of the advantages of using these tools is that they are highly integrated. So tasks in Jira can be directly linked to code in Bitbucket and supplemental documentation on Confluence. As mentioned, Jira is task management software that we use for assignment and tracking as part of the PEDSnet study workflow. Typically, the way that we use Jira at the DSCC or DCC is that we open tasks at the study level, and then we use subtasks for smaller units of work within the study. This would include code set development, cohort definition, asking for code review from a colleague. Atlassian makes available a lot of documentation, so I've included a link to that here. And I would note that we will walk through some examples of how Jira is used for studies in the live session. Confluence is the wiki-style application that we use for knowledge sharing and meeting notes. Similarly, Atlassian provides documentation on how to use this tool, and we'll take a look at some examples together in the live session. We also use Bitbucket, which is a Git-based code sharing and version control platform. It's important to make the distinction between Git, which is the open source version control software, and Bitbucket, which is the code repository hosting platform, similar to GitHub, but we use Bitbucket. Again, Atlassian makes available documentation for this tool, and I've also included some links to resources on Git, the version control software. There are tutorials made available by Atlassian, and there's also the site specific to Git itself, which provides documentation too. And again, we'll take a look at some examples of how we use Bitbucket and also how Bitbucket, Jira, and Confluence can be integrated together in the live session. So to recap, we use the Atlassian suite as part of the PEDSnet study workflow. We'll go through some examples and some live demos in the live session. I've also pointed you to some Atlassian provided documentation as well. So we use Jira for task tracking, Confluence for knowledge sharing, meeting notes, and Bitbucket for code sharing and version control. I think the most critical takeaways for trainees are to document your work well using Jira, Confluence, and also document your code. And also to commit as well as push your code often using Bitbucket. Ideally, we should be working in such a way that if something happens to your computer or something happens to you, maybe you accept a role at a different institution, that's not going to be too disruptive to the project because we can review these materials and have an understanding of the work that's being completed and pick things up where we left off. That brings us towards the end of our Week 8 PEDSnet study workflow pre-recorded lecture. The learning points for this week, so that's this pre-recorded lecture, the readings, as well as the live session, are as follows. Trainees should come away with an understanding of why we use study specification documents as part of the workflow, how they would contribute to completion of the PEDSnet DAP as part of a study workflow, as well as how we use Jira, Confluence, and Bitbucket to organize our work. Thank you, and I look forward to reviewing some examples and responding to your questions in the live session. Thank you.